The Other warrior king lay amidst the charred remains of his fallen brethren, his breathing ragged, every inhalation laced with the sting of ash and dust. Once, he had been the revered protector of countless worlds. Now, he was alone, left to bleed out on a desolate, war-torn planet, the echoes of battles fading into silence. His gaze drifted to the horizon, where distant suns cast a dim glow, and he waited, hopelessly, for help that would never come. He thought of the promises his allies had made. They had sworn oaths, vows of loyalty and protection, forged in times of shared battles and bloodshed. He had fought for them, led his forces to defend their worlds, spilled his own blood to protect theirs. And now, in his darkest hour, they had abandoned him, each one of them cowering in fear of the new galactic overlord who had swept through the stars like a plague. Bitterness clawed at his chest, sharp as a blade. So, this was the fate of the mighty Other King. To be forgotten, discarded, treated as nothing more than a pawn left behind on a board where he once ruled. As darkness started to creep into the edges of his vision, he sensed something, a faint hum in the distance. He forced his eyes open, half expecting to see his enemies returning to finish him off. But instead, he glimpsed something strange, a small human vessel, hovering cautiously above the landscape. Humans. The younger race, often underestimated in the grand schemes of the galaxy, lacking the advanced weaponry and towering ships of the older civilizations. They were explorers, traders, wanderers, unlikely heroes in a war waged by empires. He scoffed, wondering why they would dare approach, what they could possibly hope to achieve here, on a planet drenched in blood. Within the vessel, a heated discussion unfolded. The human crew, having scanned the surface, identified the Other King. They knew of him, knew of his people's storied past and relentless prowess in combat. The pilot hesitated, cautioning against involvement. "We don't owe him anything," he muttered. "Getting mixed up in their wars will bring nothing but trouble for us. Leave him be. He's not our concern." The commander listened, torn. The odds were grim, and helping this alien could mean certain death if they were caught in the crossfire of rival factions. But there was something else, something they couldn't ignore, a sense of duty that had long defined humanity's ventures into space. "He's alone out there," the commander said softly, as if speaking more to himself than the others. "Abandoned. Left to die by those who called him friend. If we turn our backs now, we're no better than they are." Silence filled the cockpit. Each crew member grappled with the risks, the looming threat of retaliation. But in their eyes, a spark of determination flared. One by one, they nodded, sealing their decision without words. They would not stand by while a warrior, any warrior, was left to perish in betrayal's cold grip. As the vessel descended, the Other King tensed, his remaining strength coiling in preparation for a fight. When the humans finally stepped out, approaching him with cautious but resolute expressions, he met their gaze with suspicion. In a voice weak but laced with steel, he addressed them. You come to mock me? To witness the fall of one once mighty?" His tone was biting, laden with mistrust born of too many recent betrayals. But the human commander shook his head, stepping forward. "No, we're here to help. We couldn't ignore a soul left behind, not even yours." His words, simple yet firm, held no trace of falsehood. He extended his hand, a gesture that was as alien to the Other King as it was humbling. No other race would dare risk so much for so little. The humans, so young, so small in the grand scheme, seemed almost foolish. And yet, as he looked into their eyes, he found no malice, only genuine resolve. The king's voice softened, his defenses wavering. "Why would you risk yourselves for me? You owe me nothing." His words, usually sharp and authoritative, now held a hint of vulnerability. "Sometimes it's not about what we owe," the commander replied, his voice steady. "It's about what's right." With that, they began to treat his wounds, working with careful hands and solemn expressions. The king watched them, bewildered, feeling a strange warmth that had long been absent, a flicker of trust. It had been years since anyone had shown him kindness, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of it settle into the cracks of his spirit. As the humans prepared to move him, the king felt his strength waning, yet his pride refused to falter. He cast a final look at the battlefield, the smoldering remains of his fallen warriors, the broken promises scattered like ashes on the wind. And in that moment, he knew he would not forget this act of bravery, this refusal to abandon even the weakest, most solitary soul. These humans, these unlikely rescuers, had given him more than just aid. They had reignited something within him, something he had thought lost amidst the ruins of loyalty and honor. And so, as they lifted him, he whispered a promise, one meant for himself as much as for them. "If I live, I swear, my people will remember this day. We will remember the humans who did what no other race dared to do." The commander nodded, his gaze steady. "We're not leaving you behind." The words were spoken with finality, unyielding as stone, and for the first time in a long time, the warrior king allowed himself to believe. In a universe where power ruled and promises crumbled, these humans, these strange, tenacious creatures, had proven themselves different. And as they carried him away from the field of betrayal, he realized that he was no longer just a fallen king left to die. He was a survivor, a witness to a rare and precious thing, a glimpse of loyalty that even death could not take from him. The rescue had begun, but every step forward seemed perilous. As they maneuvered through the planet's hostile terrain, each member of the human team remained on high alert, nerves taut like a bowstring. They knew that any moment could bring them face to face with patrols from enemy factions who roamed the war-scarred landscape. This wasn't just a mission, it was a gamble with their lives. They moved quickly but quietly, knowing they couldn't afford to draw attention. The commander had divided their roles with precision. Some scouted ahead, scanning for threats, while others carried the necessary medical supplies, anticipating the injuries they'd find. These soldiers weren't unseasoned. They'd seen enough battles to understand the weight of what they were attempting. But this was different. They weren't fighting for territory or strategy. They were risking everything to save a lone, battered warrior, one they had no true reason to protect, yet couldn't bring themselves to leave behind. As they crept closer to the king's location, the oppressive silence was shattered by the rumble of enemy vehicles. The team froze, every member instinctively blending into the shadows, holding their breath. They watched as a squad of alien patrols rolled by, oblivious to the humans lying in wait. Seconds stretched into minutes, but the team remained disciplined, trusting each other's instincts, moving only when the threat had passed. Even as their hearts pounded, they maintained their composure, driven by something deeper than mere duty. When they reached the warrior king, he looked worse than they'd anticipated. Blood matted his skin, bruises and burns streaked across his body like battle-worn armor. His eyes, once sharp and fierce, held a weary acceptance. He seemed almost resigned, a proud being who had prepared himself for the end. But as the humans approached, he raised his head, studying them with guarded curiosity, unsure of what to expect from these strange rescuers. The medic knelt beside him, gently examining his injuries without a word. The king grunted, instinctively pulling back before he realized there was no threat in the human's touch, only care. He allowed them to work, bewildered by their quiet dedication. These were not the actions of warriors bound by politics or pacts. These were acts of mercy, pure and unrestrained. It was humbling, even for a king who had seen and survived countless battles. The commander signaled for the extraction to proceed, and the team moved quickly to prepare him for transport. As they worked, another patrol approached, closer this time. The humans didn't panic. Instead, they moved with calculated speed, positioning themselves in protective stances around the king, ready to defend him even at the cost of their own lives. The king watched, astounded, as these humans, who owed him nothing, who could have left him to his fate, placed themselves between him and danger without hesitation. One of the soldiers, catching sight of the approaching patrol, whispered urgently, "We need to move now." But their movements weren't chaotic. They were precise, disciplined. In that moment, the king felt something strange, a spark of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in ages. They lifted him, each soldier bearing part of his weight, and he felt a pang of vulnerability he had long tried to suppress. But as they helped him move, he began to understand something he had overlooked in his own kingdom. and among his so-called allies, loyalty born not of obligation, but of choice. These humans had chosen to help him, to risk everything for a being from another world. It was a truth that struck him deeper than any wound. As they made their way through the unforgiving terrain, the king whispered, almost to himself, "Your people, you value life differently." The soldier beside him glanced up, offering a brief nod. "We don't leave people behind. Even if they're not, like us." The king fell silent, absorbing the words, watching as they maneuvered around obstacles with him, shielding him from dangers as if he were one of their own. It was a concept foreign to him, yet one that resonated deeply. He saw how they moved as a unit, their loyalty to each other and to him evident in every step. It was more than bravery. It was a bond built on trust and shared purpose. As they neared their extraction point, the path was suddenly blocked by a group of alien mercenaries, armed and ready. The humans braced themselves, forming a protective line in front of the king, weapons raised. Despite being outgunned, they stood their ground, every one of them prepared to defend this wounded warrior they had only just met. One of the mercenaries sneered, eyeing the humans with disdain. "Why risk your lives for this relic?" he taunted. "He's a dead man walking." But the human commander didn't flinch. His voice was steady, unwavering. "We don't abandon our own. And anyone we choose to save becomes one of ours." The mercenary scoffed, but the human's resolve didn't waver. In a flash, the team moved with coordinated precision, disarming the mercenaries in a series of swift, calculated attacks. The skirmish was brief but intense, ending with the humans victorious. The warrior king watched, astonished. These were not seasoned, hardened soldiers of some great empire. They were ordinary beings who, through sheer will and unity, had overcome insurmountable odds. As the final mercenary fell, the team continued their march, breathing heavily but undeterred. They didn't speak of their victory, didn't celebrate. They merely carried on, focused on one thing: getting the king to safety. When they finally reached the extraction zone, the king looked at each of them in turn, his gaze heavy with a newfound respect. These humans, with their small vessel and humble equipment, had defied the galaxy's expectations. They had risked everything for him, a stranger, an outsider, and in doing so, they had shown him a kind of strength that no weapon or empire could match. As he prepared to board their vessel, he managed a whisper of gratitude, his voice thick with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "You are unlike any I have known." The commander nodded, giving him a look that held no trace of arrogance, only a quiet, unshakable determination. "We just did what was right." And as the engines roared to life, lifting them off the desolate planet, the warrior king realized that in the vastness of the galaxy, true honor was not found in power or conquest, but in the courage to stand by those who had been cast aside, and the willingness to protect those who had been forgotten. As they ascended, leaving behind the barren wasteland, the warrior king felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him, but also something unfamiliar, a quiet comfort. He watched the humans around him, each one focused and determined, yet not driven by orders, but by a choice they had made willingly. In a life ruled by alliances of convenience and broken pacts, this decision seemed almost naive. But here it was, as real as the pain that coursed through his body. The human medics worked quickly, cleaning his wounds with practiced hands, their touch steady and gentle. The king found himself marveling at their efficiency, their quiet but firm focus. He had been attended to by healers before, yet this was different. There was no hesitation, no fear in their movements. It was a care that didn't come from duty, but from something far more profound, a respect for life itself, perhaps. One of the medics, noticing his silent observation, offered a reassuring smile. "Not so used to getting help, are you?" she said with a lightness that was both comforting and strange to him. The king managed a nod, unsure how to respond. He had never been a figure who inspired ease or warmth, yet here were these humans, tending to him as though he were no different from one of their own wounded soldiers. Between breaths, he couldn't help but ask, "Do all your people value strangers this way? What makes you do this?" His voice was barely above a whisper, raw from the battle and the betrayal that had preceded it. The medic paused, glancing at her commander before answering. "We're not here to calculate worth based on species. We help because that's who we are." She returned to her work, her words lingering in the air like a quiet revelation. For a moment, the king felt exposed, vulnerable not just in body, but in spirit. He had lived his life by a different code, one that valued strength and loyalty, but only to a point. As they treated him, he found himself listening to the soft exchanges between the humans. They spoke in low tones, discussing tactics, sharing memories from past missions, sometimes even offering bits of humor to lighten the tension. There was a bond between them, one built not just on duty, but on something far more personal. It was like a family forged in fire, each one willing to protect the others without question. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt anything close to this. His own kin, his allies, they had stood by him in battle, yes, but each act of loyalty had come with a price, an understanding that there were limits to their bonds. But these humans, with their lesser technology and youthful race, seemed to care for one another with a fervor that defied logic. They did not question their commitment, did not falter in their resolve, even as they traveled deeper into danger. At one point, the human commander leaned down beside him, assessing his condition with a concerned look. "You're a warrior," the commander said, almost in awe. "A leader of one of the galaxy's most powerful races. And yet they left you." The words held no judgment, only a quiet sadness. The king, unable to hide his bitterness, replied, "They left because loyalty is a currency traded as easily as credits. I was useful once. Now, to them, I am an inconvenience." His tone was laced with the sting of betrayal, the kind that could only come from those he had once trusted. The commander shook his head, meeting the king's gaze with unflinching sincerity. "In our ranks, loyalty isn't something you trade. It's something you choose. Once we make that choice, we don't look back." There was a solemn pride in his words, a conviction that the king found himself both admiring and envying. A quiet settled over them, each human focused on their tasks, ensuring their path remained clear of potential threats. The warrior king, despite his injuries, began to feel a sense of calm. He was no longer surrounded by treacherous allies or foes plotting his downfall. Here, he was among individuals who had chosen to stand by him without expectation, without gain. It was an experience that chipped away at the walls he had built around himself, walls that had shielded him from the pain of broken loyalties and fractured bonds. Time passed in steady silence, the humans exchanging glances and hand signals, navigating the skies with precision. At one point the king, feeling a strange urge to reciprocate their trust, began to share tales from his own past. Stories of his youth, of battles fought and alliances forged, of oaths made and broken. They listened, absorbing his words with a respect that took him by surprise. They didn't interrupt, didn't question his honor, didn't dismiss him as a relic of a time gone by. One of the soldiers, hearing a particularly sorrowful tale of a battle lost, looked at him with a mixture of respect and empathy. "You've seen a lot of death, haven't you?" he asked gently. The king nodded, the memories flashing in his mind like ghosts he had tried to bury. And yet, here they were, resurfacing, finding a voice he hadn't realized he wanted to share. "Death is part of the path we choose," he said finally, his voice softened by exhaustion. "But betrayal cuts deeper than any weapon." The humans exchanged glances, each one understanding the weight of those words, even if they had never experienced it themselves. It was a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of pain that transcended language or species. The commander, glancing over his shoulder, offered a small nod. "You're safe with us. No one's leaving you behind." The simplicity of his words brought an unexpected comfort. The warrior king, a being of honor and pride, allowed himself to close his eyes, letting his guard down for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The journey continued, each mile bringing him closer to safety, but also deeper into the bonds of trust he hadn't realized he could still feel. He could hear the humans making plans, discussing contingency measures, ensuring every possible threat was accounted for. They treated him as one of their own, not with the deference of subjects to a king, but with the respect given to an equal, a comrade. At last, as they neared their destination, he opened his eyes, feeling the exhaustion lifting, replaced by a new resolve. He looked at each of them, his voice steady but filled with a weight he hadn't allowed himself to express before. "If there is ever a time when your people need an ally," he began, choosing his words carefully, "the Other will remember this day." The humans exchanged glances, some surprised, others nodding with quiet acceptance. The commander smiled, his expression one of mutual respect. "Then we're honored. And we'll remember as well." With that, the warrior king knew that something within him had changed. No longer was he just a relic of forgotten battles or a symbol of forsaken loyalty. In this journey, in this act of mercy and trust, he had found something he hadn't realized he was searching for: a family not by blood, but by choice, a bond unbroken by politics or pacts. And as they neared their destination, he allowed himself a small smile, knowing that even in a galaxy torn by greed and betrayal, true loyalty could still be found in the unlikeliest of places. As they approached the orbiting extraction ship, the warrior king sensed the weight of their journey lifting. His injuries, though severe, felt lighter somehow, his resolve stronger. He was leaving behind the wasteland of betrayal, ascending towards something greater, an alliance forged not in power but in shared courage. The humans around him, silent and focused, had given him something he hadn't felt in a long time: a reason to believe in loyalty without price. Once inside the extraction ship, he looked out at the barren world below, now fading into the darkness of space. It was strange, he felt no bitterness, only a quiet sense of closure. That planet, with its empty promises and broken oaths, no longer held him in its grasp. His gaze turned to the humans who had risked so much, driven not by gain but by a belief in something he was only beginning to understand. He felt something uncharacteristic, almost like gratitude, although he struggled to put it into words. The commander approached him, giving a respectful nod. "We'll reach safe space soon," he said simply, as if this act of heroism were an everyday occurrence. But the king knew better. He had seen countless species turn their backs on those in need, had watched allies flee when the price grew too high. These humans had done the unthinkable, acting not out of duty but of choice, and that made all the difference. After a moment of silence, the king finally spoke, his voice steady, though each word felt as though it carried the weight of a lifetime. "What you have done, it is beyond what any of my own allies would dare." He paused, struggling to express the depth of his thoughts. "If you ever call upon the Other, I will answer. My people will answer. For you, there will be no hesitation." The commander nodded, his expression one of quiet respect. "Then we'll count on that. But hopefully it won't come to that." He didn't linger, returning to his duties, but his words left an impression. The king could sense the humans' commitment ran deeper than the moment. They did not seek reward or recognition, they simply held to their beliefs. As the ship moved steadily away from the battle-torn planet, the king overheard the humans discussing their journey. They spoke of returning home, of loved ones waiting, of lives far removed from the endless wars and shifting allegiances that had defined his existence. For them, this mission was but one chapter in their lives, yet they had faced it with a courage that resonated with him. They fought not out of ambition, but because it was their way, their unspoken code. One of the soldiers, sensing his gaze, offered him a slight nod. "You fought hard down there, sir," he said simply, as if recognizing the strength it took to survive betrayal. The king returned the nod, finding comfort in the soldier's words. It was an acknowledgement that needed no explanation, no flowery language. They respected him not for his title, but for the strength they had witnessed. As the ship settled into safer territory, the crew relaxed slightly, sharing stories of past missions, of times they'd rescued stranded explorers or intervened in conflicts they had no stake in. The king listened, absorbing each tale. He could hear the pride in their voices, a quiet confidence rooted in shared experiences. They did not boast or seek admiration, they merely valued what they did, each other, and those they chose to save. In the quiet moments, the king reflected on his own path. He had been raised to believe loyalty was a finite resource, something earned and spent according to need. Yet these humans, a younger race with less to gain, saw loyalty as a constant, a bond not weakened by fear or hesitation. He realized they had taught him something he hadn't known he needed, that strength came not just from power, but from the willingness to protect those in need, no matter the cost. As they approached their destination, he turned to the commander one last time. "In my world, such loyalty is rare," he admitted, his tone respectful. "You have shown me what it truly means." The commander met his gaze, his expression unchanging. "Loyalty isn't about being told what to do. It's about doing what you know is right." His words, though simple, held a gravity that resonated deeply with the king. He had fought in countless wars, had seen empires rise and fall, yet here, in the quiet determination of these humans, he had found a new strength, one that transcended the mere mechanics of loyalty and duty. As they prepared to part ways, the king felt an unexpected sense of loss. He knew he would miss these humans, their steadfast resolve, their unwavering courage. They had shown him a glimpse of something rare, a fleeting yet powerful bond that went beyond alliances and treaties. They had made him feel less like a pawn and more like a true comrade, one worth fighting for. When it was finally time to say farewell, the king extended his hand, a gesture he had never offered to any other species. "You have my gratitude and my allegiance," he said, his voice firm, yet softened by something almost like pride. "The Other will remember this day, and your people will find allies in us, should they ever need it." The commander shook his hand, his grip strong and steady. "We're glad to have you on our side." The words were spoken with conviction, a promise as solid as any oath the king had ever sworn. In that moment, he knew that this was more than a passing alliance. It was the start of something lasting, a bridge between their peoples built on trust and honor. As the king watched their ship depart, disappearing into the stars, he felt a new sense of purpose ignite within him. He had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at loyalty, at belief in something greater than himself. These humans, through their quiet courage, had shown him what it meant to be bound not by duty, but by choice. And as he returned to his own people, he carried with him the lessons they had imparted, a strength that came not from power or force, but from the bonds forged in the darkest moments, bonds that could endure even in a galaxy teeming with treachery.